College Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Real College Podcast. I'm your host, Noah Grossman, and as always, it is my pleasure to have you here with me as I explore the various industries of mass media. My guest today is Will Morris, who is an FSU student that has recently been studying the television industry and how it operates. Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Noah. I've got a lot of research and I'm really eager to share it with you and your listeners. Thanks for having me on. Again, it's an honor.
And we can't wait for you to share it. So, let's get right down to business. Now, how exactly does the television industry function in the modern age of media?
Well, that's a fantastic start right there. Based on what I've read in the International Encyclopedia of Social and Behavioral Sciences, the three main components that supply television signals to screens across the world are broadcast stations, cable systems, and direct-to-satellite home divisions. The industry functions through networks producing and distributing their approved programming through the use of these three stations, cable systems, and DBSs. The National Association of the Broadcasters Guide to Careers in Television does a great job of breaking down major components that go into operating these television networks. Creating and streamlining content to individuals' televisions is only one drop in the ocean that is the TV industry. In addition to the dispersing content, networks have many jobs in assisting the budgeting, marketing, researching, engineering, and creatively writing the program itself. All this work is a ton of teamwork, and each television show requires many different people doing many different jobs to come together and produce an entertaining piece of TV.
Wow, that's incredible. I've never really put that much thought into all the people who have a hand that go into what I'm watching. I have to imagine the industry is kind of evolving a bit right now, what with streaming becoming all the more popular, right? I just finished watching House of Cards on Netflix, and my entire weekend went from binging episodes to binging seasons, and the next thing I knew, the show was over. I watched the entire show in the span of 2 days, whereas there are still shows that only release one episode a week, or a season a year. What is streaming doing to the industry?
It's funny you specifically mentioned binging House of Cards, because that was actually Netflix's first original series. A Reuters article I recently read pinpointed the show as the real acceleration of cultural shift towards viewers binge watching their favorite series. Not to mention how this show proved that Netflix had more than enough power to make a hard-hitting, gritty political drama on their own. I mean, a streaming platform coming out with a dramatic series, that was so out of the blue. It's so revolutionary. I mean, you could say House of Cards was to Netflix what The Sopranos was to HBO. I mean, HBO was certainly on the radar before The Sopranos came out, especially in the 1990s with the Larry Sanders Show, which, may I add, was revolutionary and huge for the network. That show was the first of its kind when it came to these satirical, situational comics. They're shot a lot like a documentary. And of course, when I'm talking about these types of comedies, I'm of course talking about shows like 30 Rock, Parks and Rec, The Office, a style of sitcom that is huge right now. But when The Sopranos came out, wow. I mean, that was the beginning of the golden age of television right there. Right around when episode 5 came out, College, that's what the episode's called. Audiences were like, yeah, this is it. Like, this is television. I mean, that car ride when Tony's 17-year-old daughter asked her dad if he's in the mafia, I mean, that's iconic. I mean, one of my favorite episodes, if you ask me. HBO really displayed the ability to create something incredible. A hard-hitting blockbuster movie quality television show. Way better than most blockbuster movies, I would say. I mean, it was dramatic, emotional, relatable. HBO convinced you to really care about, and empathize with a mob boss of all people. And after that, it just kept on coming from HBO. Shows like Band of Brothers, The Wire, Deadwood, 6 Feet Under. I mean, the list goes on. And the great thing is, we're still in the golden age of television. I mean, Game of Thrones just ended, for God's sakes. It was like a year ago. One of the highest rated shows of all time. And the quality and the budget of that show was insane. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the storyline of the final season, but that production value is unparalleled. And now, because of these great shows, it sets a new precedent for what TV can really be. The funny thing is, Netflix is making these high-quality production value shows and releasing them all at once, which is exactly how I watched The Sopranos and The Band of Brothers, even the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, among other shows that came before my time. I mean, I was a lot younger when these shows were being aired, and when I found them, I binged them. I binged the hell out of them, dude.
Wow, that's really interesting insight that you provided about how these older shows have affected the newer shows. So would you say that you being able to binge watch shows like The Sopranos that previously weren't available for binging played into your interest and the viewership of the series overall?
Absolutely. I mean, referring back to House of Cards, Netflix's decision to release the entire 13-episode first season in February 2019 granted the viewer with an unfamiliar power, the control of when they could see the next episode. I mean, ever since Netflix began this trend of streaming full seasons of television at a time, television has not been the same. According to Mass Media Communication by Ralph Hansen, television began in the 1930s with a limited number of options from the major networks, only at the time when those programs were being broadcasted. VCRs and satellites were the first step towards diversity in the television programming options, and the expanse of programming has only gotten larger and larger. Flashback 2013, where consumers can use the power of internet to stream TV, and they loved it. I mean, back then, binging was so fresh, so unique, that the term binge watch was a runner-up to the word selfie in the Oxford Dictionary's 2013 Word of the Year. I mean, nowadays, binge watching is just another part of our culture. As I discussed, television has always been centered around networks broadcasting their programs to viewers. And obviously, over time, viewers have become hungrier and hungrier for more content. They want it faster. And I think this is a lot about the cultural gravitation, particularly in America, towards services that can provide them with entertainment endlessly on command. Like, as a TV watcher myself, I think that streamlining shows straight from the internet provides a massive benefit to all parties involved. Shows can reach a wider audience since they're more accessible and bingeable. The audience is given more of a say in what they want to watch and when they want to watch it.
Ah, so you're a fan of the rise that we've seen in streaming content and binge watching over the past decade?
I'm certainly a fan, yes. But that's not to say that there are zero consequences of television's shift to streaming. That Rouge article I mentioned earlier brings up how from 2013 to 2019, Netflix has slowly but surely been drawing millions of subscribers away from pay TV. I mean, when given the choice to choose their Netflix show or gamble with whatever is on TV, I mean, audiences are clearly becoming more and more favor of choice. Naturally, networks are beginning to notice this, and as evidenced in the many streaming platforms that have been propped up recently to compete against Netflix, like HBO Max, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, these are all recent examples of streaming platforms that have surfaced in the past year. Forbes calls this the move towards a more convenient, personalized content, or the Netflix effect, and suggests other networks to follow the footsteps of Netflix. If they don't, they'll run the risk of being disrupted by the growing media giant that is Netflix. So basically, if TVs can't beat the streaming platforms, they might as well join them, because their viewership numbers clearly indicate the future of accessing media.
And you're saying that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, obviously it depends on who you ask and what they think, but what I can say is that society has proven time and time again they'll favor the control streaming provides them with over... Alright, last one. Well, obviously it depends on who you ask and what they think, but what I can say is that society has proven time and time again they'll favor the control streaming provides them with over the vulnerability they subject themselves to when randomly seeing what is on cable television. Is this the death of cable? Probably not. And after all, there will always be power in local, national, and global broadcasts from certain demographics. But you may have also noticed the recent trends of networks digitizing their content on streaming once it is broadcasted already. And eventually, there will just be as many streaming services as there are channels on your DVR. I mean, look at Comedy Central. Like, for I don't know how long now, but for a while, after a South Park episode comes out, they'll throw it on their website. I mean, literally right after it streams, digitizing, right on their website. That being said, people are currently also saving money on high cable bills by paying much more affordable monthly fees for Netflix. Consumers can justify their lack of cable by the fact that Netflix offers a wide variety of both original programming in addition to shows produced by other media corporations. These corporations have been producing and distributing TV shows are already starting to pull their content from Netflix in hopes of moving them to their own streaming platforms. The main example of this I've seen recently comes from NBC choosing not to renew Netflix's right to stream Friends and The Office. I mean, these two shows found major spikes in viewership as fandom as a result of those who watched them on Netflix years after the show had ended. similarly like to the way I watch The Sopranos. And NBC hopes that moving these hit shows to their upcoming streaming platform, Peacock, they can profit a lot more directly off of them without giving Netflix a piece of the pie. So when you ask about the Netflix effect being good or bad, it's certainly going to have pros and cons. Pros, more jobs in the industry in order to make more content, which will be more accessible to viewers. Cons, this content will eventually be only accessible through streaming platforms owned by the networks producing the content. And as networks move to stream their content independently, the increase in streaming platforms available will certainly lead to consumers having to purchase more and more subscriptions in order to access content across networks. But remember, networks are merely adapting to the recent development of streaming TV. The era of streaming has clearly affected all components of the industry I originally listed, from broadcast stations to cable systems to direct satellite to home divisions. As always, the television industry revolves around the need of the consumer, which will always change. So that's some good news. As TV changes and adapts, we the consumers will always have the most influence on what changes come forth. So I'm definitely going to keep doing my part. I'm going to keep consuming whatever the networks provide me with.
Well, if all it takes to do your part is to keep consuming content, then count me in, because I'm going to keep watching, because your boy's bored, okay? Quarantine's taking a toll on me, but what have you been watching recently so I have something I can take back to the missus later tonight?
Hey, well, same here, my friend. I think boredom's getting to the most of us. To my happiness, Netflix did put on Avatar: The Last Airbender back on Netflix.
Another example of a show with a Netflix bump in viewership, huh?
Oh yeah, I mean, that was my favorite show when I was a kid, and Netflix had it back in the day when I was in like 8th grade or so. So, I mean, when it came back on, I binged the hell out of that too.
Well, and that's really all TV can do for us too, is provide us with those emotional connections that Avatar's provided you with. So I'll have to check that out sometime tonight, but unfortunately for today, that is all the time we have. So thank you again to my lovely guest, Will Morris, and his expertise on television and its industry, how it's evolved today. This has been a Real College Podcast. Signing off, I'm Noah Grossman.
It's a Real College Podcast.